So, good evening, everyone. Let's start the forum tonight. So, I'm Andy Brockway. I'm the chair of Acton 2020 and also of the Kelly's Corner Steering Committee. So I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. As you can see, we've got it sort of set up in varying tables. You're welcome to come up and participate at a table. If you want to sit back in the audience, that's fine as well. The idea of the tables is that we'll have a presentation on several different topics, and then we'll invite you to sort of weigh in on that at the various tables. So just a brief overview about the process in general, where we're at, where it's going, and what tonight's about. So the steering committee has been meeting since the kickoff was in March of this year. So we've met for 7 times, roughly once a month. We've had one public forum to date back in May, and that public forum focused on the existing conditions analysis. And there was also a chance then for the public to weigh in on some of their preferences for, let's say, building type, sort of sidewalk design and orientation, some parking configurations. It was a chance for the public to express their ideas about how they access Kelly's Corner, how they use it, and what they might see for Kelly's Corner in the future. So that was the first public forum. This is the second one, and the emphasis tonight is there will be three basic topics that we're going to look at. And so we'll look at traffic and circulation, streetscape design, as well as sort of land use, I would say, patterns and strategies. And we'll offer up some alternatives tonight that we'll ask you to, again, weigh in on, and we'll do that after the end of each major sort of topic. The other pieces, there are some basic principles and goals of the planning process that we'll present, and we can discuss those also if you want. But they give a sort of underlying rationale for the process and sort of what we're trying to achieve. So tonight we have with us our lead planner is the Cecil Group, and that's with Steve Cecil and Ken Buckland and Nels. Sorry. And then Jason is the traffic engineer, and so they'll help do the presentation tonight. And with that, I think I'll give it over to Ken.
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. We're going to be working around these tables, so eventually if anybody wants to participate in the breakout groups, we'll want you sitting at the tables. If there are not enough chairs, pull a chair up and you can have your work with the sessions as we continue, but we'll get a little bit into that as we go along. What we're going to do is start with an introduction, give you a little bit of an idea of where you are as a town in terms of Kelly's Corner and what we're seeing in that regard. We'll be talking about the different alternatives, and as I said, we'll have breakout groups. Now, the idea is that we're going to be looking for the ideas, giving us the merits and the issues you see with each of the alternatives as we come into the session. We'll be making a short presentation on each of these so you understand why we have the alternatives we do and the direction we're suggesting. And then we'll go through, as Andy said, the circulation and roadway alternatives, the streetscape and the landscape, and the land planning and urban design. And we'll conclude with a summary of what you've accomplished in this evening's session. So let's jump right into our introductory piece, which is some of the findings, some of the broader issues, the context within which we've seen Kelly's Corner and how it plays out. But to take it back from the town process, it started before Kelly's Corner initiative. It was part of the Acton 2020, the comprehensive plan and the process that came up with the idea of focusing on a coordinated land use and development strategy for Kelly's Corner. And right now, in terms of the process, we've gone through an evaluation of the existing conditions. We've gone through workshops. We've had a number of interviews. And at this point, we've talked about alternatives and choices. We want to bring those forward to you and have that discussion with tonight's agenda. There have been, as I said, previous discussions. I don't know, how many people were here at the first workshop? Great. So we're going to make sure we've heard you, and you can correct us if we didn't get it right, if we didn't hear it appropriately, and make sure we're on the right track. And we're going to do that by a little bit more of a focus on the direction we're talking about in terms of the Kelly's Corner and those elements. I don't know if you can see this with the lights on, but this is the boundary. We do have a location we're talking about in terms of of Kelly's Corner, and it takes the intersection of Main and Mass Ave. It has the Roach Brothers Plaza. It has the schools in the back of it, outside of the boundary, and the residential development that exists going further south, but has the Kmart Plaza and as I said, the full intersection going all the way up Main Street to the medical office, and the interchange is just outside of the boundary. Route 2 coming on the outside here. One of the things that we wanted to look at was the basis for change in the community and within Kelly's Corner. This map and the colors are indicative of the year that the buildings were built within Kelly's Corner. Each of the colors represent a different color, going all the way back to 1890. So the value we see in this is that you're under continuous change. Things will be changing. They have changed. They will be changing. And what you have to say about it in terms of the direction is very important, and that's the reason why it has a context for the community. But the problem is that development, although it has a long history, was not very well planned, and it's broken up into properties that are accessed by the existing right-of-ways, but individual lot development occurred over time and has created a condition typical of a lot of New England, but a little bit more modern, not necessarily the traditional kind of development as in West Acton, the village center, but its own history and its own way of developing based on private investment that comes over in the overall appearance of the plan. And the problem with that is that there's an inconsistency within that development, that it starts to lose some of that character. You have the character of a commercial center, but not necessarily the character of a town center, or one of the centers within the town of Acton. In terms of the potential for this and the idea, we say there is change. We have done some of the market research. You can see it yourself in terms of the CVS store that's being constructed on the street south of Roach Brothers, where they are located now. So there is some change that's possible, and that's quite that's part of our considerations of what goes on within the future of Kelly's Corner. But you're in a competitive market. You're in a region where there's a lot of other small village centers, the community centers that are developing and want to develop in certain ways. And it becomes very important that you put your best efforts towards maintaining and upgrading the Kelly's Corner so that it remains competitive in this regional market as part of that, maintaining the viability of the area. One of the things that will make all the difference in this is the ability to have a better mobility, reduce congestion, address some of those issues, and that's one of the big issues that we're attempting to address in the alternatives that we've developed, so that this makes it a more viable, active, and attractive area. That's the infrastructure piece. The other aspect of the controls you have and the ability to approach the future of Kelly's Corner is through zoning, the land use controls that you have in place through the state enabling legislation. It says you can allow certain development, you can control certain development, you can provide incentives to development of Kelly's Corner, and in doing that, you can try to direct the way the development occurs. You can't change the market, the real estate market itself, but you can take advantage of that market in terms of ways that fit with the character of the town and what you want to see in terms of development. Well, as Andy had said, that there have been quite a bit of work by the steering committee up to this point. They've come up with a series of principles that Andy is going to address at this point.
So through the course of the study, and also I think even preceding that with the 2020 plan, and also some basic shared experiences, we've developed a set of principles and goals for the study. These principles are used as both in terms of giving an underlying rationale for the study itself and for setting sort of a means of evaluating the proposals that you see in front of us. And these principles that you see are fairly simple in their concept. They're at what I might describe as a 50,000-foot level sort of perspective on the overall planning process. You can get ones that are more finer grained, but to start out, we're looking at one that says simply, Kelly's Corner ought to change, and it can change. And I think based on the existing conditions analysis, it's quite clear that there's room for improvement, and that it's important to believe that it can change. As Ken said, for example, there are ways of doing that through zoning. A corollary to that is whether you like it or not, it's going to change. You could like it to stay or wish it would stay the way it is today, but that's not going to happen. The historical record is pretty clear that change is occurring. In fact, as we are here tonight, there's a good deal of change going on in Kelly's Corner. So there's no reason to believe that pattern's going to stop. So faced with that there's good reason for it to change, that we have the capability of changing it, we should look to actively guide that change as opposed to allowing it as sort of the ad hoc process that you see. Because what you see today is, in part, a result of lack of planning. And so if this is what you want, then you're not looking for sort of a planning process. Then there are two sort of principles about sort of that really are tied in as objectives for any of these plans. It's not enough to say that, well, we need to develop a certain site because it's not attractive. And that's a base sort of starting point. But you need to think about a larger picture of how all these things tied together into some larger ideas about the needs of town as well as Kelly's Corner itself. And in Acton, there are a series of town centers or villages, whether it's West Acton, South Acton, where we are right now, which is purely a sort of civic center, so without any commercial connection. And Kelly's Corner effectively acts as a town center now, but it's clearly it's sort of not really recognizable and not really coherent. And so an important objective in terms of evaluating any proposal put forward is to see whether or not those proposals advance the notion of having a town center. Not the town center, but a town center. Along with that, as everybody knows, traffic is miserable. And so you could solve that any number of ways. You could drive a superhighway through here and we could clear out the regional traffic. But then you would obviously be left with something that's less than desirable. And so a fundamental notion about dealing with any traffic and circulation is the idea that any solution will be a holistic approach that will include a solution for not only vehicles, but pedestrians and bicyclists alike. Sort of a complete, there's a complete streets policy. Those two things go hand in hand. That idea about traffic and circulation goes in hand with an idea about having a town center. And finally, the last sort of principle is just an affirmation that we as a town can do something about this, and we should do something about it. And we have the tools, whether it's through zoning, through design guidelines, and through public investment in the public space. And so those are some basic principles. Through the study, it's become clear that there are certain components of the plan that are becoming important to see a complete sort of give the chance to have an ideal solution or solutions. And so, for example, one of the goals is to have shared parking where possible, to limit the size of parking to the number needed to support the services there, as opposed to simply having parking everywhere. So that's a component, an idea. Another is the curb cuts. Jason will talk more about the traffic and circulation, but this idea of we need to limit the number of curb cuts and we need to make sure they're designed in such a way that traffic can flow more freely. In a sort of bigger picture sense, traffic and circulation will follow a complete streets policy. And again, that's sort of one policy that will include bicyclists and pedestrians and not just simply cars. And that has real implications about the size and space that you need and how you go about designing the roadways in the public way. Another one is that multifamily housing will be allowed as part of a mix of land use and developments. And so I know this can be a hot button issue with people, and we'll sort of see what the idea is behind that. But housing is not sort of the main objective here, but it's certainly a useful tool in achieving certain goals and allowing for a certain sort of complete sense of Kelly's Corner. And we'll talk more about that. Private development should include public amenity. Well, what's public amenity? That can be something as simple as what you see out in front of the redesigned plaza at Not Your Average Joe's, where finally there's some sense of public space. You know, it's just simply in this case, a public plaza with some seating and umbrellas, and it makes a connection back to the services being provided. And so that's one notion about public amenity. And it doesn't have to be literally only that type of amenity, but the idea that private development should have some bigger idea behind it. And then finally, that streetscape and landscape elements will reinforce the desired character. And then that goes again to sort of, I think that ties in with the notion of a complete streets policy. So there are some basic principles and some basic components, and you'll understand a little bit more about the components in particular as we go through the alternatives. So.
Can we ask questions now, or do you want us to hold?
Can you please hold them so we can...
Okay.
At this point, we're going to start into the alternatives and the choices, and I'm going to turn it over to Steve Cecil and Jason.
So tonight we're going to talk about some of the choices that all come out of those principles, and in thinking about that, we're going to focus. There's a lot to think about and to talk about. So we've divided the session this evening into three different parts. The first part is going to be focused on the circulation and roadways and some fundamental choices that are out there and the implications. We'll take a break and talk about those, and after that we're going to talk about the streetscape and landscape alternatives and what the look and feel of Kelly's Corner ought to be. And finally, we're going to look at, beyond the public side, the streets and sidewalks, and look at how zoning and other tools could be used to shape the uses around Kelly's Corner. So with that, and I'm going to work us through each one of these in different ways, but we're going to focus right now. Jason DeGray is going to talk about circulation and roadway alternatives.
Great. Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Steve. So I want to kind of clear the table for this traffic, roadway, circulation discussion. Who here in this room feels that traffic congestion is a significant issue in Kelly's Corner that has to be dealt with? Okay. Who here feels the lack of cohesion to the pedestrian and the bicycle facilities in Kelly's Corner is a significant issue that needs to be dealt with? Who raised their hand for both questions? Great. These are not two mutually exclusive ideas. It's a design exercise. You can accomplish both of these goals, and I'm hoping to show you tonight some avenues to doing that. But it's important to note that these are both objectives that we're striving for as we go forward talking about alternatives with Kelly's Corner. So taking a step back for a second and kind of focusing in on the traffic congestion. What's driving the traffic congestion in Kelly's Corner? It's two things, both of which equally contribute to the traffic congestion. It's regional traffic. Kelly's Corner sits at the focal point of two major crossroads off of Route 2. You have two interchanges off of Route 2 within hundreds of feet. Both of these roads cross at the center of Kelly's Corner. Major issue. That intersection today is not equipped to handle the volumes that pass through it today. The other element driving congestion is access management. And we'll get into what that means in a little bit more detail, but to kind of boil it down to its simplest terms, imagine you're driving south on Main Street, and the car in front of you wants to turn into the Bolodrome. This happens around 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. The amount of traffic traveling the opposite direction, that car could sit for a minute before it finds the ability to turn left into the Bolodrome. What happens to you sitting behind that vehicle? You're waiting that amount of time too. And every other car that comes behind you is waiting. So that exponential ability of that one vehicle turning left into one driveway can drive the congestion in Kelly's Corner as much or even more so than the regional demands that the traffic volumes are imposing. We have to get a handle on both of these elements if we want to effectively deal with the congestion issue in Kelly's Corner. So when we approach this problem and devising these alternatives that we're going to walk through, we have a couple of base parameters that we're operating with. The first one being regional traffic will not be stopped. To address the regional traffic, you have to address the interchanges in Route 2, and that is a scope of work above and beyond what the town of Acton itself can control. But traffic is not going to increase, at least not notably. I'll come back to this in a second because I think maybe that warrants another second or two to talk about. But in addition to that, another principle is it should be easier for residents of Acton to access Kelly's Corner, whether that's by foot, by vehicle, or by bike. The entire area should be safe for walking and biking. And as has been alluded to, the town and the state now have complete streets policies, which means the design we put into our public infrastructure has to account for the needs of all users, whether they're on foot, on bike, or by car. And that's just a base condition and a mandate that we're charged with going forward. To go back to A, regional traffic will not increase. So we've known in the industry since about 2004, nationwide, vehicle miles traveled per capita peaked. And for the first time since the advent of the automobile, we're seeing a period of time where we're not experiencing any noted growth in traffic nationwide. This occurred pre-recession, and coming out of the recession, we're seeing this trend continue longer than any other previous recession. It's driven by demographics, it's driven by needs to return to dense city living, and it's really a generational discussion. But that's the broader context of what's happening nationwide. What's happening here in Kelly's Corner? Well, I got news for you. This isn't the first time the town has looked at Kelly's Corner and tried to figure out a solution for what's facing it. I'd say at least once a decade, for at least the last 40 years, maybe longer, there's been a noted investment in trying to figure out ways to get a handle on various issues, but most notably traffic. I don't expect you to really kind of be able to decipher these volumes, but the last time a major traffic analysis and investment took place was back in the mid-90s. Traffic is really at its peak then. The traffic that we've quantified as part of this effort in 2014 is 15% lower today than it was in 1996. Now you can say that's something specific to the area. Was it kind of the demise of digital in Maynard? Was it something else more unique to Acton? Who knows? It's a 15% lower than it was today. And furthermore, what was taking place in 1996, they were really looking at a world where traffic was just spiking through the roof. So the last time a real effort was done the solution really did come back and said, you got to really have, some 4-lane highways, as a lack of a better way of putting it, to really handle this traffic condition. We're in a totally different era, in a totally different outlook on how to handle these issues. This is your design character today. As I step through these alternatives, we're going to kind of present you images of what these solutions kind of mean to the design character of Kelly's Corner. This is today. We have 3 alternatives I want to present to you tonight. We have a targeted improvement, a balanced network, and an expanded network. The targeted improvements in the balanced network, these are independent choices. You can have one or the other. It's a choice for the community. It's a choice for the steering committee. It really is the 2 separating factors. The expanded network is not. The expanded network is dependent upon the balanced network as its base. And you'll see what I mean as we get into it, but these 2 are kind of linked at the hip. The targeted improvements is really what can we do more or less within the existing footprint of the roadway today. We're talking about squeezing as much as we can out of the efficiency of the signal, adding sidewalks throughout the area comprehensively, but it's essentially a low, well, I'll phrase it differently. We're not moving the curb out, okay? We're trying to limit the alteration to the land outside of the existing footprint to the extent possible and, squeeze what we can out of the system. The balanced network, as you're going to see, is a more comprehensive investment in terms of getting a handle on the congestion and the various other elements of the project. So kind of digging in a little bit deeper on targeted signal improvements, improving existing crosswalks, providing sidewalks throughout Kelly's Corner, implementing access management principles. I'll show you what that means. Looking for opportunities on a project basis to implement some of these improvements as development occurs. And a theme you're going to see in basically all of these, except Community Lane, otherwise known as No Name Road, as a town-controlled asset. It's too critical to the network to be up to anyone else. It should be under the control of the town. Graphically, what you're seeing, if you can make it out, the blue lines, sidewalks, ADA compliant, sidewalks throughout the network, both sides of the streets, as well as Community Lane. The pink and the red lines represent curb cuts, driveways. The pink are driveways that are excessively wide that we can narrow. The red are duplicitous curb cuts that over time can be looked to be eliminated. The goal here is really about predictability, about managing traffic so that all users can come to expect where and how vehicles may enter into their traffic stream and limiting those conflict points. And then we want to enhance the signal. I won't go into a lot of detail. What you have out there today in terms of the technology, it's operating one plan throughout the day. It's not really responsive to the varying characteristics of traffic. We can certainly upgrade that. The visibility of the signals, the equipment, these can stand to be upgraded. They're tired. Pedestrian amenities, the pedestrian equipment at the signal doesn't meet current code. The biggest thing being the time actually allotted to cross the street. That would be upgraded significantly by about 10 seconds. ADA compliance, this is not just at the signal, but throughout the network. Again, sidewalks are ADA compliant, wheelchair ramps ADA compliant, and various other design features that are standard to any new construction today. And this would be the character of the place if we were to select an option such as this. I will say this option has, it's limited investment to get there, and it's also going to have limited return. We're going to do what we can with what we have and make sure we're squeezing as much out of that as possible. The balanced network. Okay, here we're going to incorporate some of these left turn pockets. You can kind of figure yourself picking up the curb on either Main Street or Mass Ave and pushing it out to accommodate in the center left turn pockets. So if you're turning into one of these land uses, you can pull out of the traffic stream and vehicles can get by behind you, and you're really getting a handle on that exponential increase that we talked about earlier of one car being able to block many behind them. The other benefit of that is when you do that, you don't need those left turn pockets everywhere. So in those places you don't need them, you could have a nice landscape center median, really works to the aesthetics of the area, pedestrian refuge, and other benefits. Improving and adding new crosswalks, adding bicycle lanes. This is a new feature that was not in the targeted bicycle lanes on both sides of the streets, sidewalks again on both sides of the streets. The same access management principles we spoke of previously. Again, except in community lane, but this time on either end of community lane, we're going to signalize those intersections. That's basically a capacity and an access management need. To show these graphically, the same sidewalks as we previously showed, the same treatments to the curb cuts, but now we're going to kind of have that interior space for the left turn pockets and the medians, bike lanes on both sides of the street. One feature that I think this is maybe the most abstract and one to consider going forward is the need to kind of integrate the school complex into Kelly's Corner. You have a very informal desire line from the high school, basically that comes back to Main Street, and there's a noted foot crossing there. Over time, the town can look to formalize that and make that a town amenity. In this scenario, when we're putting a signal at the end of Community Lane with Main Street, that signal can be used to accommodate a protected crossing of the pedestrians, the school children. We're also talking about adding capacity to the core intersection itself. Previous, historic have talked about really widening out the 4 lanes along each approaches. That's not what we're talking about doing. We're talking about lengthening the left turn lanes, adding a couple right turn lanes because you can really get a big bang for your buck out of doing that, and really providing some additional capacity to meet the existing demand that's imposed on this intersection. Just going back to this real quick, this is a much more comprehensive addressment of the issue. And with that, it's a much more comprehensive investment, and the ramifications to the alterations of land outside of the existing curb are much higher, well, maybe not much higher, but notably higher than they were under the previous condition. So that's really the trade-off. It's cost and what's going to happen to the land beyond the existing curb. This would be the design character based on that solution. I would also say that this is probably, in terms of the width of the road, this presents a very conservative view. This kind of cross-section where you have these 2 lanes falling way back in a third, that's only on the Main Street approach. The Mass Ave would be the existing left turn lane and through right as it is today. Bike lanes, center median. So now the expanded network. The expanded network is really a lot about facilitating the principles of what you're going to hear with the remainder of the conversation outside of the circulation. It's about the land use and what Kelly's Corner is going to be down the road. To be able to really transition Kelly's Corner away, step it from where it is today, we first need to get a handle on the regional congestion, the traffic congestion issues. If we do that, which is what we demonstrated on the Balance Network, you can then start to look internally and figuring out how you develop Kelly's Corner over time with a transportation network that serves Kelly's Corner and not necessarily both Kelly's Corner and regional traffic. So create internal streets to facilitate private development. Design these roadways and internal connections. They don't need to be vehicle ways. They can be pathways for pedestrians and bicyclists to enhance the mobility for all users. Provide that alternative connection to the school complex, and implement design and zoning standards for private development. What this really is starting to show where, once we have a handle on the congestion issues, you could really start to place new roadways servicing the place of Kelly's Corner and opening up a broader network of development opportunities. This would be a design character of one of those internal roadways. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Steve. I think just in summarization as he comes, obviously there's a fairly noted variation between the balanced and the limited improvements.
So we just talked about an expanded network that could occur if and when development occurs in some of the larger parcels or areas. These would be accomplished by the private sector. What we're not proposing is that the town create new major cross connections or streets. A more balanced approach to this, where we're looking at a combination of turning lanes and intersection improvements, et cetera. One of the things that's important to understand is that Main and Mass Ave are state, what they call state facilities or state roads, and there are standards that they're using consistently to make sure, in working with communities, that pedestrian, bicyclists, and motorists are taken into account. Now, there's a variation that you can apply for, but we have to make sure you understand that you'll be working with the state in establishing that approach. Whereas if you take on a more limited improvements, where it's a paint up, clean up, fix up, I call it, approach, you may not trigger as much of the state concerns about these because of the regional roles that these streets play. But as soon as you start to do significant improvements, then the interaction with the state will be more significant. So we just wanted to let you know that as you think about these different approaches, there's a different circumstance here than other communities might have in terms of who and how these places might be changed to benefit. So what I'd like to do now is entertain just a few questions, make sure that we've communicated properly the basics of what we're working with, but what we're really anxious to do is to split up into a series of working groups. We've got 5 different tables set up, and if you can gather around them, we'd like to answer questions specifically and just talk with you about what your thoughts are in reaction to this information we put forward. So any overall questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, when you talk about reducing curb cuts, I assume that that's to try and make crossing safer and turning less pedestrian unfriendly. But my concern is, what about people with walkers and wheelchairs? What about younger parents with carriages and strollers? How do you deal with that if you're eliminating easy ways for them to get off the curb?
Well, when we talk about curb cuts, we're talking about where a car can come onto a site. So it's the driveway. So if you think about the driveway here, for some of these places, there is no driveway. The asphalt from the roadway goes right into the parking lot. That's the driveway, and it may be 50 feet wide. And you can run into those strange situations where somebody's turning left and somebody's turning right, but they're not in the right location even. And you've got to watch in every single way. And for pedestrians, it's really, truly scary. So what you try to do, what they call access management, is make the curb cuts the right width for cars to come in and out and line up properly and not have them too close together or too many of them so that you can put sidewalks across it. And what we found is that those turning movements in and out of the driveways, the curb cuts, is a big part of the problem in Kelly's Corner. If someone stops in front of you to take a left-hand turn to go to a shop, you're just plain stuck. And they may not even be turning in the best place. So just cleaning up that edge is important. That's what we mean by curb cuts.
So you're not talking about curbs where pedestrians can use a lower curb.
Right. There's what they call accessibility ramps or handicap ramps, where the sidewalk dips down so that they can get across, and that is an absolute requirement if you're going to touch any sidewalks and roadways and crosswalks these days is part of what needs to happen to take care of that. So that's a given. As soon as you touch something, you need to make sure that those transition ramps are in place. Maybe take a couple more. Yes, you had your hand up, and then I see your hand back there. Yes, ma'am.
I think a lot of us are hoping that with the construction of the Littleton commuter rail parking facility, that it's going to take some of the commuter rail pressure off our parking here. I'm wondering when you guys evaluated the data on, congestion and regional traffic, whether you considered that at all, whether that was going to siphon off any of the congestion.
I would say it's not something that explicitly played into the alternatives themselves. What we are operating under the base assumption is, even with that reduction, you're not going to see such a noted decrease in traffic that it's going to be a game changer for what we want to do going forward.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering, could you explain the
Yeah. So the way that it works is if it's sort of screened back, we say screen back a little bit. So you've got Mass Ave and Main, the main crossing here. But if you look at the land that's back in behind it, this is, for example, where TJ Maxx is, or this is back where the schools are, or back where Kmart is, or back in behind where the new CVS, the Bolodrome, and all are. These are areas that someday, it may be 30 years, it may be 10 years, who knows, it could be sooner. But if those are to be redeveloped, one of the ideas is that you could create organized series of driveways and roadways internally to them that connect in logical places within the town, within Kelly's Corner, and that it's not just vehicles you can think about. You can think about pedestrian paths that link up, because part of the problem right now is that there are no sort of cut-through places. One of the things we did check, just to finish up this point, though, is that if we felt that there was a killer new street that you could create that would relieve the congestion and make a much better route for Kelly's Corner, that's something we would have brought forward. But we find that there's not that much of it. There's no second street that makes any sense that would really change things as far as that goes. So what I'm going to suggest, because we'll have people who can answer every single one of your questions, we hope, we think, within your groups, if we could break up and just grab some chairs and form up around these tables, and we'd like to talk to you for about half an hour or so, okay?
Just one other thing before we do that, as we break out, I would like to introduce some of the members of the steering committee, so as they're at the tables and you want to ask them questions, you can go ahead. So right here is Margaret Bussey. She's from the Finance Committee. Eric Solomon over there at that table is not only is on Acton 2020, but he's also a resident of Kelly's Corner. Bonnie Northern, who's hiding over there, she's also on 2020 and a resident of Kelly's Corner. And Peter Darlow back over there is a representative from the Design Review Board. And I think that's it for tonight. So go ahead and you can feel free to ask them any questions besides the consultants. So.
Okay, that sounds good. So if you could, when you come together, we did a quick count, and there should be exactly 10, not 9, not 11, exactly 10 people, maybe not, but really close to that. So if you want, and we already have about 7 people over there, so 3 more people over there, and 4 or 5 here, and fill up around these tables. We'd like to get started to talk to you more about this topic of traffic and circulation in Kelly's Corner. Thanks.
Okay, everyone, let's try and wrap up this session. We need to move on to the next one.
That's really how it happened. That's right. They needed to. Okay.
All right.
All set. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, that turned out not to be boring. I have to say that if I can interrupt for just a second, if I can, here we go. As I said, that wasn't boring. Everybody had opinions, at least in my group, and I bet from the sound of the volume in the room, there's a lot to talk about. We can continue talking about some of these ideas, but we wanted to introduce a couple more topics, and we're going to start with this first. The next topic, we wanted to talk about the landscape and streetscape. As you improve, however you think about the circulation approach and how it resolves, the look and feel of Kelly's Corner is not conducive to a high-quality, high-value retail or commercial area, residential area, or as a gateway to other sectors of the community. There are a lot of improvements that could occur, but as you think about the expenditures that will be made to make sidewalks happen and crosswalks happen and better streets and curb cuts, you have an important opportunity to really change and improve the look and feel of Kelly's Corner, what they call streetscape. What is a streetscape? It's the combination of elements that make a place have a strong identity and a positive identity. This is not Kelly's Corner, of course. This is down in Falmouth, a project that we designed many years ago, which really helped transform their downtown. It was really economically struggling at the time, but we had to make choices about what's the look and feel, and they're really we think two really very different approaches. We'd like to get your feedback on. One way of approaching it is to say that it ought to be kind of a civic character, a town character. Another way to approach it is to say, no, this is more of an informal place with an informal landscape and streetscape that we work our way through. So we had some principles, and I know we had a handout and talked about the principles earlier, but the idea is that it should be a great place for pedestrians, it should be a great place for walking and bicycling, and that the overall character and quality should be improved. We have just a few of the images of the conditions that are there, and there are places where the sidewalks disappear entirely, and the changes can be really considerable. So first of all, we wanted to introduce the idea that you could adopt a kind of civic character to the sidewalks. And when we think about the word civic, it means to us that there's a very consistent pattern of street trees, almost like a boulevard or a clear pattern, and that the street furniture, the lighting, and the paving are all meant to have a kind of unifying character. This is all one public realm, as we say, through which people move. One of the things that often happens in this kind of townscape is the sidewalk goes right to the curb. It's that traditional way of town centers. And you can think about the kinds of materials that make sense. So we are thinking of an environment where you'd have repetitive elements, particular palette or collection of materials, and kind of a traditional vocabulary. If you think about this building, for example, which is such a landmark, and some of the monuments here, they come from an era where civic improvements had a certain quality to them. So as you think about the furniture, lights, for example, have a character during the day that you need to be thoughtful about, as well as the nighttime lighting that is provided. And we've just picked out a few of the items that you can start thinking about being places that are traditional. Think of it that way. It's a traditional character, even if it's brand new kinds of bollard lighting or bicycle racks, they come with a kind of a language or a character. And you can think of different places that have this kind of civic character that's built up over time. Some of them are brand new. This is actually brand new street down at Cape Cod. We thought this was pretty interesting because it incorporates bicycle paths directly as part of an overall cross-section. This actually has parking, which we wouldn't have. But you can see the very regularly spaced trees, and you sort of know that this part of the street is really part of the same street when you get down to the end. Or one of the things that we wanted to show you with the Falmouth image is that just because it's civic and somewhat formal doesn't mean that all kinds of informal things can't happen along the way. So that in the fall, the character of what people bring out in the street to make it part of the quality of an attractive place for people to walk and stop and shop and eat is built into it. So that's what we mean when we say you could have a kind of a civic character, more formal character. The other way you could think about the streetscape in Kelly's Corner is to think of it in a much more informal way. So you might have, instead of street trees that march along the same tree every 50 feet, same tree, maybe you have a varied set of trees. They're not all the same, and maybe they're not all spaced together. Maybe they aren't set back differently. You're driving through and walking through and bicycling through a place where the character changes over time. And maybe you introduce the landscape back into the sidewalk edge so that, in effect, there's a little setback, and maybe the sidewalks aren't absolutely straight. Maybe they wind. You know, there's that little spot where the sidewalk improvements today just had to make it around a tree and up and around, and it's actually kind of neat, in my way of thinking. So that's the kind of character that you can have. They're both the same, by the way, the same amount of streets, the same amount of sidewalks, the same amount of trees, the same amount of street lights. But if you started to pick some of the furniture and the way that you do things, for example, in a lot of places today, they're paying a lot of attention to the sustainability. How do you drain the water? What are the kind of plants that are here that will not require a lot of maintenance, but are really complementary to the area? And what could happen with, well, this is New England, and fences don't go straight in New England all the time. And even some more contemporary elements can happen. So you start to think about places. This is a little bit of part of the town center over in Weston. They actually do have some trees that are lined up, but in general, it's a pretty picturesque area. This is actually over in Pine Hills, and they were very deliberate with their little commercial center, that it feels much more informal in terms of the way the landscaping works, even though the buildings are kind of traditional and formal. So that's a different way. It's just a whole different way of looking at the design characteristic of the town center. It's important to understand that regardless of what kind of circulation improvement that you pick, and gets funded and built, these two different kinds of characters can be adapted either way. So if, for example, if the solution is to keep two travel lanes, pretty much what you have today, you could still be adding landscape and sidewalks in an informal character, or it could be much more formal. Or if you end up having some bike lanes and some auxiliary lanes, these turning lanes, it could be a more informal landscape or more formal. Interestingly enough, if over time in the larger parcels of land as they develop or redevelop, and you set standards, you can make sure that the private sector development, when they have drives and circulation and sidewalk, match what's happening on the outside. So you have a whole district that gets tied together. So those are the basic two choices that we think are there. And we're just kind of curious, if you had to pick, and we're all going to have to pick at some point, how would you guide us? What kind of feels right for Kelly's Corner? So we thought we'd just sit down and talk to you about this a little bit. Okay? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt and give ourselves, so here we go. Let me just interrupt for just a second. I'm just going to interrupt for just a second, okay? So, Kristen, let's see if I can interrupt. Once again, I get this feeling that there were opinions offered at some of the discussion. Let me give us. We're going to put one more topic in front of you to roll around and talk about and give us your response to. We've talked about the circulation where the vehicles and pedestrians and where the bicyclists would be. We've talked about what the look and feel is going to be, all of which is pretty much under the public control one way or the other. But when we take a look at what happens on the parcels, on the private land in Kelly's Corner, that can be managed by the town, but at the very least, it's a kind of a partnership because it's private investment, private land, and what the town does is it sort of sets the conditions for that. By having a better streetscape and better circulation, you will create a better environment for the businesses or people who live here or people who work here, people who visit. You can set that environment and make it better than it is today. But one of the things that's important as you think about the kinds of tools that you have incentives and zoning to set rules, is what would you like to see happen? And I liken this to gardening, and I'm a pretty good gardener, but I've never been able to make a tomato grow. I've ordered it to grow, and it won't grow. All I can do is set the conditions. I can water it and can put the fertilizer in, and some years it works and some years it doesn't. But to be a good gardener is not to determine everything, but it's to set the conditions to over time create the things that you'd like to see happen. So when we start to look at the private sector side of what's going on, it's more like that. But we've got to know what kind of garden should grow here. So as we take a look at that, we're going to take a look at what we call land planning and urban design. And urban design is really how you create a townscape as opposed to an individual building. And we have three different ways of thinking about what could occur here. And one we've called the enhanced townscape. Let's enhance what's here. One way you could think about this is a commercial and retail center. It's kind of what it is today. How do you make it a better one? But then a topic of conversation and planning in town for a long time has been mixed use, a broader set of mixed use. And could and should that, and how could that occur within Kelly's Corner? I won't read through all of this, but as I'm talking, you can look at the screen to see if I can make the correct point here. Is that you're going to be able to change the conditions that occur here, but the market and real estate economies depend on a lot of factors and may take some time. So it's important to remember as we take a look at some of the ideas here, some things could happen tomorrow. We don't entirely know, and some things could take longer. So we'll have to think about that. One of the things that's important to understand is that the reinvestment that does occur has to make more money than it costs to do it. So that's another way of putting it is that if someone's got a 50,000 square foot professional office building out here and you say, I'd really like you to have a 2,000 square foot general store, they're going to say, I don't think so. People tend to need to make more money in the future than they have in the past in order to reinvest. And that will include a certain number of additions or renovations or alterations of buildings. It's not just new things that occur. One of the things that happens today is that people have been allowed to use up most of their sites for a combination of buildings and parking. And when they build that out in this kind of environment, you might say that the efficiency, the theoretical efficiency of the use of the land is pretty high. In other places, there's a jump that happens where people put parking into parking structures, and then they can keep using the land and redeveloping it in different ways. But the value of the land has to be very high. So as you head in towards Boston, you can find that level where parking structures are being created. And parking structures, all they are really is a way of creating more land, right? Because you don't have to spread out the parking. You can concentrate the parking. What do you got? Land. What are you going to do with it? Well, I can use it for a lot of different things, but I've got to make money in order to build that structured parking. And we don't see you in an environment in the short term or even midterm where it's going to be worthwhile for people to build parking structures the way that they have in some other communities. So, so in a sense, what we're trying to understand is how people might be given an opportunity to reorganize or create more intense uses, more effective use of the land than they have today. So one of the ways to think about this is to set the stage for some incremental additions of new developments, not really changing allowable uses so much, but one of the things that you can do to allow a more efficient use of the land, which is a more cost-effective way of developing under certain circumstances, is to provide for shared parking, better access, and other improvements. So, and when I say shared access, if two parcels of land share the same driveway, they don't have to both pay for the same driveway, they've got more land to develop, it can make a lot of sense as long as people agree to this. Some towns didn't used to allow that, and towns that are doing that today are asking people to do that. Everybody wins. There's more investment, there's more value, and the tax revenues are always good too. So if we take a look at this, what we think you might want to do is to just encourage the renovations and reinvestments, allowing some flexibility. You want to make sure that there are things called non-conforming sites. Well, just because a site didn't pay, that doesn't fit the rules today, doesn't mean that you don't want people to reinvest in it and improve it and make it at least better than it was. So that's something to think about that gets a little technical as far as planning and zoning is concerned. But you will have and are experiencing a series of infill projects. So encouraging redevelopment that uses the front or unused backed areas of existing parcels with complementary uses that share parking is a way of increasing the efficiency of the use of the infrastructure. So here's a little scenario that we're going to walk through with a hypothetical site. It's a block that is not, it just has all the characteristics of some of the blocks that you have. The idea would be to require buildings to have a principal orientation of the street. They look towards the street. To try to get the parking along the sides or behind the buildings so that you can have landscape and sidewalks in the front. Set standards for the quality of the area, which is a way of increasing the value for everybody, public and private over time as well. And this idea of encouraging multiple buildings on lots if they're appropriately located so that you don't run into this problem with all these little teeny tiny lots being created by using the larger parcels more effectively. So imagine a kind of a block. This really doesn't have any particular place, but it does look kind of like Kelly's Corner, right? There's a great big commercial with a bunch of parking in front. There are some buildings maybe with some parking in the front or along the side. Some of them are kind of house-like in terms of shape, but if you look at the curb cuts along the street, they're just sort of everywhere, and everybody's got their own parking lot. Another way to do things then is to set the rules so that, for example, you might remove a driveway where it's not needed, let people share parking, create parking back in behind, and begin orienting the buildings. So, for example, this building, if you remember in the previous slide, this building was set back from the street a little bit. Maybe what you want to do is to allow for an addition that brings it out more towards the street, but in exchange have the parking behind. And something that a lot of places are discovering, and a lot of landowners are discovering, is that they sometimes call these pads, but little shops and stores or professional offices can gather in the front between the street and the parking lots of some of the large format retailers. And if they share the same parking lot, you get a different street. You still have commercial uses, but it's a different look and feel. But in order to do that, you can have architectural standards so it all makes sense. But that's a real contrast from what it looks like today, and you can create a little bit more density overall, but doing it in an attractive way. So these are strategies for incremental development, and where and how do these things happen? One of the things that I think is that you're doing it. I mean, I think that the way that the TD Bank was done is to respond to this idea that we should have a nicer townscape. It's got a front door, a front lawn, the parking's around the side. And these are from some design standards. There's a kind of zoning that's being used a lot which says just very clearly We'd like, Main Street is good, we could have buildings along it, but we want the parking tucked in behind and some landscaping involved as far as that goes. So you set rules to make that happen. So that's how do you enhance a townscape. But as you take a look at the notion of Kelly's Corner as a commercial and retail center, you might not only provide for enhanced development as infill, but employ site standards to better organize projects which are on larger sites and to provide for infrastructure improvements that make sense. So you could be promoting this kind of commercial retail redevelopment, making sure that there's off-street connections to adjacent parcels to the extent practical. Maybe you've seen this in a number of places down on Route 1, down in Norwood and Westwood and those places. You go into one restaurant and you don't have to go back out on Route 1 in order to get to the next store. You can keep going, which is really important when you've got a crowded street. You connect the dots internally in a way that really makes sense. And then when you have plan development, when you have large sites, what you can do is think about making sure that the overall effect is really planned. A lot of the parcels are sort of spoken for relatively small lots or residential uses that may not change quite a bit, but there are some chunks of land that over time might change a fair amount. This is the southern southeastern portion of Kelly's Corner, back behind the Bolodrome and back up against the hillside. This is kind of a Kmart block, I might think of it that way. And these are the kinds of sites that under the right circumstances, commercial circumstances, are being redeveloped. And this is the Edens complex and a bunch of land that they own in adjacent parcels. The key thing here is that over the long haul, owners of land like this will be probably looking to reinvest and rebuild in a more contemporary way. It may not be right away, where they've indicated this is not going to happen tomorrow, but they always want to be thinking that it would change. So planning for the future where you have those kinds of large assemblies of land possible is important. So one of the things that you can do is organize the development so that the larger stores are back actually inside of the blocks, not out on the front side, because the thing about larger stores is that they have a lot of blank sides. That's just the way it works. Whereas the smaller buildings often will have multiple sides that would be pleasant. And then thinking of it being organized with some kinds of internal, almost like streets. We talked about extending the street system and creating an overall planned character. So those are the kinds of principles that you could apply as you start thinking about creating an effective retail and commercial center. So where is this happening? Well, have you been over to Linden Hills over in Wellesley, anybody? So it's not too far from the T station and town hall, and there's a large supermarket complex and a lot of other stores. And what they've done is they put retail and restaurant and some little bit of offices along the main street in Wellesley. There's still a lot of parking because there still has to be a lot of parking, but it's shared parking. So if I park here, I can go into this restaurant, or if I'm here and I want to go into the store. And when you drive by along the street, it's very pleasant. There's excellent landscaping and a kind of internal street. But if you want to go to, I can't remember which it is. It's not a Roach Brothers, but it's some other kind of a store that's back there. You kind of see it at the end of the street. And that's how these kinds of retail and commercial centers are being arranged these days. Another one, this is a project that we did a lot of planning for over about a 15-year period, which is the Hingham Shipyard. And I don't know if you've been down there or not, but there's a whole retail, in fact, a little movie theater complex is part of the idea. And there's a kind of a street that's organized. Now, this is all private property. This is all private redevelopment of a large site. But they've created it as a kind of a street with stores and shops along the way, and restaurants reaching down. So actually the main street is out here. This is Route 3A, I think it is, and that's the Hingham Shipyard. So that's another way of thinking about it. But what a lot of communities are doing, and has been part of the talk and thinking in Acton, has been to have a mixed use that would include housing as a part of the development. So the idea with planned mixed use would be to expand the range of uses that are allowed in many areas of Kelly's Corner. Many of the other pieces would be the same, But the addition of that use is a really important idea because housing doesn't tend to want to be on the ground level as much. And there's some advantage of it being multiple story, let's say 3 stories is an example, very typical kind of package. People can use the land very efficiently. You can't have a retail store first, second, and third floor. The second, third floor doesn't work, but you can do housing on second and third floors. And that's an efficient use of land, and the housing doesn't require as much parking area as commercial and retail uses. So in communities that are looking for creating a kind of a district or a neighborhood, including that in a mix can often be an incentive to the developers because they can say, gee, I can still have my retail use if that's the market's there, but I can add other uses. That doesn't mean they're necessarily stacked. They're often side by side. They may have a building that has retail on the ground floor, maybe some professional offices next door. There's some townhouses or some of these kinds of housing developments. And these are occurring in a lot of different places. We think that there's a market for this in Kelly's Corner. In fact, we sort of know there is because there's housing right in Kelly's Corner today, right along these streets. And it's not so darn bad housing. And under the right circumstances, this kind of housing can be quite an asset. And so the idea would be that you would end up with something that's a little more vertical in terms of its dimensions with some upper floors. You can still, and we think you should, control the design character and the quality of all the pieces and how they come together. Where these kinds of things happen. So have you heard about the new Wayland Town Center? Wayland didn't have a town center, but there was a great big, I think it was 30-acre, Raytheon had a site that they were no longer using. So the town worked with a development group, and part of the development is designed to be 2-story components, some with housing above, some might be offices, some will be 1-story. There's actually, if you look at the plan, and it's built today, it's not completed, but these are pictures of it just after some of the pieces have been constructed. You'll see the character of it. But there's a grocery store that's part of this development, but it's connected to a little main street, and there's housing clusters, some of which are on the second floor of these buildings, and some of them which are next door and nearby. They've incorporated a small town green, and they have a future site for what they think would maybe another branch library or the main library. But it is all designed to be a place where these uses come together. Now, this site is a lot larger than the kinds of sites that you have available, but this idea of having mixed use is something that's important. So we've laid these out as kind of different ways of thinking about Kelly's Corner, and again, we're going to spend a few minutes talking to you about it before we wrap up and see what you think about this. Then we'll make a few final comments and send you off into the night, but not yet. We want your thoughts on this, okay? Thanks.
Scenarios and ideas that we put forward. What do you think?
Steve, one of the things I think that you touched on a really good point about the difference between mixed use and you didn't term it as such, but multi-use, which is basically segregating the uses. Mixed use can be very expensive to build. Mixed use in its like pure form where you have storage.
Hello? I think, okay, here we go. I want to be able to just make a few final comments and just really briefly. You all have, we talked about whether we should spend an entire day doing this or half a day doing this, and we persuaded ourselves that if people would get engaged in these different topics, that we might even go as late as 9:30, but beyond that, that we probably would be pushing the limit of people's energy and time. So I want to say how much I personally appreciate and how much we as a group of professionals that are helping you appreciate the time that you put in. I think that one of the points of having these breakout groups is that we're listening a lot to a lot of people. And we've been recording these points. To go back, I'm just going to mention a couple of things that came to my mind. Maybe you can, and we can go around the group just to pull out a few things just as evidence of the ideas that have emerged or responses that have emerged. But the thing that you should understand is that we're collecting these and thinking about them, reflecting about them, but then reporting them back to the steering committee that is charged with the idea of making some specific recommendations about where to proceed. So I think that I just say that in terms of the land use and urban design, the idea of housing had some positive responses with a bit of caution that there's traffic that comes with that too, for example. I think that as far as the landscape and urban design, it was pointed out that you really don't have to choose one or the other entirely, but the idea of having smaller civic places where it makes sense, where you can have people gather or sit, is a thoughtful response. And I think that when we talked about the circulation approach overall, I think that we found that the business of No Name Street or Community Way, signalizing at both ends, people were really concerned about it. And what we pointed out is that's where an awful lot of the people in town get access to the stores and the places they want to go. And that's really keeping that as that kind of a resource, and the idea that the signalization would really be designed to allow you to get in and out better and out of that flow of traffic. So those are 3 points, one each for each one of the topics.
Well, our group liked the idea of the balanced network, but it wasn't a unanimous decision. As you might expect, there's a lot more that has to go on in terms of the discussion between the targeted improvements that we had as an alternative and the balanced network that provides something broader and a more significant improvement. But when it came to ideas about the streetscape that goes along with it, it was pretty clear that this group liked the idea of an informal approach, the wide variability that you can have, and pointed out a number of streets that have that kind of character and where improvements have been made, where it's not a set line. It runs around stone walls, around trees, around different corners that make it kind of an interesting streetscape, and that became part of that discussion. On the land use and development, the multifamily has its own issues associated with it, and I think it may be repeated elsewhere with the idea that is it providing the kind of taxes that you want to support the kind of development within the town? It's not just what happens in Kelly's Corner. It's also those other implications to the schools and what happens beyond beyond Kelly's Corner, especially when the school is right by there. Pointing out that the kids can walk to school and won't have a school bus is maybe an issue that we can bring up and discuss as part of that concept. But those were, I guess, the big three, unless there's something else that you want to have, and maybe turn it over to Jason, have his group.
We heard a lot of similar themes with my group. The balanced network definitely seemed to kind of carry the day in terms of the circulation. There was some discussion about where can we reduce maybe some of the lengths of these turning lanes to minimize pavement. In terms of the landscape architecture, Definitely a trend towards the informal. I would say it wasn't universal. They definitely resonated more with the informal, but maybe there's a little bit of an in-between that can uniquely define Kelly's Corner. And in terms of the land use, I think the statement that summed it up best was that the residential should be utilized to augment the commercial primary use of Kelly's Corner. There was a strong sense that we don't want to lose the commercial nature to be overwhelmed by the residential. So that'll turn to Nels.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. We had really similar outcomes to your table. In terms of the conductivity, again, people liked the balanced network, but there was concerns about the takings and also about the businesses along there, and that there could be some downtime during reconstruction, and also concerns about all the new traffic lights. As for the streetscapes, the table was split, but generally favored towards informal, for the reason that if you look at the civic landscape, in most of the cases, there was a parking lane as a buffer, and without a parking lane as a buffer, that sidewalk is right up on the street, which is quite a fast street. So the landscape buffer offers a little bit of protection, but also a place for the water to go and potentially to store snow. And finally, on the land use, in principle, the table was in favor of housing to increase the vibrancy of Kelly's Corner, but there was a lot of strings attached to that about what type of housing for what type of people, and that it could not, under any circumstances, preclude commercial development, which would be the highest priority.
Thank you. So this group, again, had similar themes. For the infrastructure and connectivity piece, the group seemed to favor the balanced network, but had some reservations about what that would mean and what some of the impacts would be that are kind of unforeseen, and kind of that fear of imposing on neighbors or impacting abutting properties. For the streetscape and design, they favored the kind of mixed approach, having the more of an organic feel with green space and kind of keeping the landscaping that's already there and trying to respond to that, but also having a consistency in street furniture and lighting. For land planning, it was, I want to say, a consensus of liking the mixed use scenario, the planned mixed use scenario, and some of the same concerns were voiced that they wouldn't want to have the entire area taken over by residential uses when providing incentives to developers. So I think that's the main big points. Anybody else?
Suppose it helped if this is on. So just, again, those steering committee meetings are open to the public. We encourage you to attend, and they will be going on at least through the beginning of next year. And so if, also, I know that we email or send out through constant contact information. If anybody wants to get that information who doesn't, just let myself or Kat Hudson know, and we'll get you on the list. So thank you very much.